Hey folks, it's Dag. Welcome back. If you're new to my channel, super excited you're here because I'm trying to build this channel. If you're one of my returning followers, welcome back. So folks, really quick, just as a kind of a covering what I do, I'm obsessed with aviation. Been that way my whole life. Started flying around 1973 control line, 77s when I got into radio control. I'm obsessed with giant scale airplanes. Now, one of the reasons I'm obsessed with that is because I'm a full-scale pilot too, and I like to build airplanes or design airplanes and build them as large as I can. Now, this is an ARF. This is my OV-10 by Hangar 9, one of the best airplanes I've ever had. And I've had followers say, would I do a video about just this airplane? So that's coming soon. But my obsession, folks, was really with designing and building airplanes. And my MSL-1 has a 197-inch wing. MSL-2 had a 188-inch wing. Got in an accident rebuilding the wings. But the reason I bought this ARF, folks, was I didn't want to get into another 3-year project. I have a de Havilland Mosquito I want to build one day and a big T-28. But this video is about landing. And folks, this is one of the biggest subjects that comes up an awful lot when I'm talking to people. And, you know, folks, maybe it's because I'm a full-scale pilot, but I don't think that's it. Because when I was an instructor, every full-scale pilot that wanted to learn to fly model airplanes were the worst students I ever had, okay? Because they already know how to fly in their head. I mean, in their mind, they know, oh, I know how to fly a plane. But when you fly a model, when things come toward you, it's reversed and all of that. And I've done several videos on landing, and they're always very popular, okay? They get a pretty good view count, get great questions. Oh, again, in the comments below, put what you think of these videos, okay? Tell me your experiences with landing, or if you think it's easy, or if you think the more you fly a certain aircraft, the better you get at landing that aircraft. But if you jump around from different aircrafts, you never ever really completely master landing those individual aircrafts, because I have found out that every model airplane lands differently, okay? But I have a top 10 list for this, okay, just like I have on some of my other videos. But before I get into that, folks, I want to talk a little bit about pilot skills too. So folks, I've created some charts that I used when I used to teach people how to fly. This applies to full scale too, but you need a certified flight instructor, not me. I'll put this up over here so you can see it. But basically, when you look at these charts, folks, you'll understand that like the pre-flight's easy, taxiing's pretty easy, taking off's pretty easy. Landing is what's going to take all your resources, all your skills, all your experiences. Now, if you've got a little foamy that you can bounce into the ground real hard when you land, and you don't care, I don't know if you're going to overall learn how to become really good at landing airplanes. So one thing I would always challenge anybody who wants to learn how to land an airplane better, land the airplane and then grade yourself. Ask yourself if that was my little scales 1 through 5. 5 means I nailed it. 1 means it was terrible, and 0 means I broke something, okay? So every time I land, folks, I still critique myself. So I think it's really important. But these skills, folks, is really important because the more you fly, the bigger the gap will get between your safety margin until you jump into high-performance airplanes or something you're not used to, and then flying that airplane could exceed your skills, and you could damage the airplane. So it's really important to progressively work up through different types of airplanes. Folks, I'm working on a video right now because I think I was totally wrong in the past about wing loading. You know, I've done several videos about the cubed wing loading, and you want certain wing loadings if you're flying a trainer, and then you want a different wing loading if you're wanting to go fast. Folks, I'm seeing younger people to the hobby flying some really heavy wing load EDFs and are having no problem at all because they're getting a lot of experience on that type of airframe. So that's another video I'm going to talk about because, folks, I used to always believe in that little chart that talked about, you know, if it's a trainer, you should fly this wing load. If it's intermediate or a sport plane, if it's, you know, a warbird or a jet. I think with the simulators and everything that we're learning to fly on nowadays, and the fact that we're getting out and flying more, because our club is always busy, the only way to really master anything is just to keep doing it over and over and over. And landing is one of those things. So number one, what's the most important part to me? These are the top 10. And this isn't really in any order. And I probably should put it in order like that, shouldn't I? So number 10, a stabilized approach is without a doubt the most important part to me of a landing. If you're all over the place and your pitch is changing, your airspeed's changing, your throttle's changing, that's a disaster. And don't ever think, okay, I've got it all out of control and I'm going to get it under control right as I'm touching down. Because normally, and I don't know if it's human behavior, the closer we get to the ground, the more we start to freeze, the more we're afraid of hurting the airplane. Okay? Stabilized approach is absolutely important. Now there's a term, and I don't know if you've all heard this, it's called staying ahead of the airplane, which means you know exactly where you're going to put the airplane, you know exactly where the throttle's set. When you're ahead of the airplane, folks, you're in command. But that airplane is just going apeshit all through the air and you're chasing it. That's where you're behind the airplane. So it's really important that you put the airplane where you're wanting to put it, especially when you're landing. Another thing, folks, that's really important, and number 2, by the way, is fly the pattern. Okay, number 2, fly the pattern. Okay, I'll put this up over here. If you don't religiously teach yourself to fly a pattern, I think you're missing out on some mental checkpoints for when you're landing. When you start flying warbirds or higher wing load planes or faster planes or planes that cost more money, when I take my Flex Cessna 170 out, which I have cartwheeled many times, it is a absolute, folks, it's hard to hurt that airplane. I'm sure I could fly it straight into the ground or fly it straight into a building and it'd be destroyed. But that is such a rugged airplane. So when I fly that, it's amazing how smooth I land that airplane. It makes me look like a really good pilot. But then when I fly something like this, that's almost $4,000, even though this is a really easy plane to fly and my landings look really good, your thumbs always get nervous as you get closer to the ground, at least for me. Okay? So when you're flying the pattern, this is the way I do it. Okay, well, first of all, I want to tell you what 90% of the people do, and then how I do it. Most people enter the downwind, set their power, set their flaps, set their gears, then set flaps for landing, and then land. So in the downwind, you set the power, first notch of flaps down, gear down, you're turning base. On base is normally where most people will go full flaps, and then that gives you all of final to have a stabilized approach. Now, I do it differently with my planes. When I'm in the downwind, when I'm flying down the runway in the air, getting ready to do my brake or my turn. Well, I shouldn't say brake because forget I said brake because normally the brake's in the downwind. So when I'm flying over the runway, I drop gear. I can visually see the gear door open, see the gear come down. I turn crosswind, 1 notch of flaps, turn into the downwind. Well, hang on, I got to back way up. I'm screwing up here. When I'm flying down through here, okay, over the runway, I bring the power back to about half, let the plane start to slow down, hit 1 notch of flaps. As I turn the crosswind, gear down. As I enter the downwind, full flaps, power all the way back and up a couple of notches. And that way, my base to final is what I call a very stabilized approach. Okay, that's how I do it. And I know some other people that fly scale warbirds that do that too. It gives you more time. Time is your friend when you're trying to land. Okay? Number 3, manage power, don't chop it. And I've talked about this in other videos, folks. And look, I try not to put people down. But when I got my full-scale pilot's license, I ended up having 2 instructors. One instructor really didn't know shit. Honest to God. Went to a college, learned how to drive a plane like a car, and then tried to teach me how to fly. And folks, I know this sounds really arrogant, but I've been flying model airplanes since '73, the control lines, then got into everything. And I've designed my own airframes for many, many years. And I don't want to say I knew more about flying than him, but I absolutely did. I probably had more hours in airplanes, even though I hadn't logged it, than he had as an instructor. But some of the things he said were so stupid to me. And I hate to use the word stupid, folks, but One time we were doing deep stalls, and as the plane dropped and the nose started to lose heading, I used rudder to control it. He goes, don't touch rudder. You can enter a spin with rudder. And I'm like, douchebag, that's how you hold heading when you're stalling an airplane. That's what prevents the stall, is using rudder. That was my number one red flag about my instructor. The number two one was, he's seen too many videos of jetliners landing. They come in, they flare, chop the power, you bleed off and land. Model airplanes and even smaller full-scale airplanes like Cherokees and Cessnas, I always would leave the power on just a little bit until my wheels are almost on the ground and then ease it back. Anytime you change the throttle abruptly, it's changing the condition of the airplane. And you don't want to just come in and chop it, okay? So manage the power. Another thing is, don't just kill it in the downwind and glide all the way in. Some airplanes, well, hang on it. You can do that with most trainers, but it's not teaching you to be a really well-disciplined pilot. Because when you start to move into warbirds or EDFs or something like this, especially when gears go down and flaps come down, you have to hold power. So if you spend the first year learning to fly trainers where you just kill the power in the downwind and you glide in, then you start to get into other airplanes and you start to do that and you realize your sink rate's all high, and then you're like jerking the throttle up and you're getting into an unstable approach. And folks, I know there's a lot of people that give me a hard time saying, well, you know, Damon, you're flying airplanes exactly like full-scale planes. Yeah, exactly. Why not? It looks cool. And I haven't crashed a lot of airplanes except for my own stupidity. Number three was manage power. Number four, airspeed is key to a certain extent. Depending on where you fly at, folks, and how much room you have. If you're a newer pilot, or you're just transitioning into an EDF or into a warbird, as long as you land somewhere in front of you at first, who gives a crap? Okay? Once I master an airplane, I always try to land right on the end of the runway and roll out before I run off the end of the runway. Now, if you just got a big grass field you fly on, fine. You can kind of do an imaginary where the runway would be. But one of the things, folks, is there's a weird phenomenon. It happens in full scale too, and there's been people that's died because of this. When you're in the base leg of flying the airplane, and then you're turning final, your depth perception goes through a wonkiness where when the plane's flying straight at you, you really can't tell its airspeed. We don't have an airspeed indicator, we don't have a stall horn, we don't have anything. We have a visual reference. And with this plane here, full flaps is 60 degrees. Gear down or air brakes. I have to carry about 40% power when I'm in base, getting ready to turn final. But what happens if I start to overshoot, which a lot of us do, and now I got to pull the plane back to get it to the runway? Normally, our instinct is to pull that stick back. And folks, I have the thing I call the teeter-totter method, which is basically anytime I'm pulling back the power when I'm getting ready to land, anytime I'm pulling back on the elevator, I'm adding power. Okay? Because as you're coming through that turn, you want to be adding power as you're pulling the stick back because you're raising your angle of attack, which is bleeding off airspeed. Remember, folks, when they teach you to fly real airplanes, pitch is airspeed, power is altitude. Now, if you've got one of these 300 watts, per pound, 300 watts per pound 3D planes, you can just hold it vertical and take off out of your hands if you're experienced enough. That's not real aviation. That is steroid Dirk Diggler power, okay? When you're flying something like this that has maybe 120, 130 watts, per pound, you've got to be very conscious of flying it like a real airplane. But airspeed is always your insurance policy. Okay, now when you get really good, really experienced, and you start flying more scale, you can nail that airspeed. But if you're feeling nervous or wonky, or it was a late night in the shop working with airplanes and you're wanting to get out to the field at 9 in the morning, you're a little bit tired, airspeed is your friend. I would much rather do a go-around than stall an airplane when I'm on final approach. Number 5, gentle inputs. When you go, so folks, I have some things that I set my radio up to make my landings make me look like a very good pilot. I still consider myself an average pilot after all these years. I think I'm a great builder, a great designer, a great engineer, but as a pilot, I think I'm still okay. Folks, I learned to fly at a plane at an airfield, or a model airfield, that had a left-hand pattern. And it was like that 90% of the time. And I still find myself today, after all these years, 25,000 years I've been doing this. I started flying before Jesus even had a paper route. Here's the thing. When I fly right-hand pattern sometimes, I still feel a little bit weird because you get used to what you do. So I set up my dual rates and my expo so that if I'm like, folks, I love to pretend when I fly this airplane I'm taking off on a sortie. And these planes were kind of like close air support. And they were there to help the troops on the ground and call in missile attacks and bombs and all that junk. But they were very agile. They would fly very low, really getting into hard, high G turns. It was amazing when you watch the video footage of this airplane flying. Also, if you watch these at air shows, they used to be real popular in the air shows in the 80s and 90s. These are extremely agile airplanes, okay? And I like to fly like that, which means I need a lot of aileron. I need a lot of rudder. I need a lot of input, okay? But not when you're landing. So, folks, believe it or not, when I go to land, I have an expo setting where it makes the middle of the travel a lot smoother. So my little bitty inputs when I'm landing are much smoother. Now, if I go to full elevator, like I'm gonna, sink too fast, I'm adding power and I need a lot of elevator, with that expo, I can still get a lot of elevator. But I actually have my dual rates and expo set up for kind of like a landing mode. And it really helps me a lot. And folks, one of the things about landing is visually knowing your sink rate, your airspeed, and when you're going to start to round out your flare. And on my MSL2, I never truly 100% mastered landing that perfect because I actually had the landing gear too far ahead of the CG on that airplane. And every time I touched down, I'd pitch the nose up. So if my airspeed wasn't absolutely perfect when I touched down, I would always bounce, go up about a foot in the air, go maybe 100 feet, and then it would settle back down. And if I can find the video, I'll put it up over here, but I'm not going to promise you. But that plane, folks, it was a landing gear problem. On tail draggers, landing gears need to be put in very specific places, but I'm not going to go into designing an airframe right now. Number 6. Basically, if you're coming out of, it says basically line up early. So as soon as you're out of base to final, make sure you are truly lined up, you're stabilized, and you know exactly what's going on with that landing. Okay? Number 7. Flaps with respects. I've done a video, folks, on flaps, or maybe 2 videos. 99% of model aircraft don't need flaps, but there are some. This big-ass pig at 48 pounds needs flaps. So if you don't know what flaps are really used for, and most people are like, well, they're used to create lift, Damon. Well, but they're also used to keep the nose of the airplane down. So when you think about bringing a full-scale airplane into land, you want to be able to see over the bonnet. You want to be able to see over the front of the airplane, and you want to be able to see the runway. If you get in a Cherokee or a Cessna and leave the flaps up and land, to generate enough lift to get slow, your pitch is really high. It's hard to see over the front of the airplane. So on a Cessna or a Piper Cherokee, when you dump the flaps, the final full flaps, you can look down. If you take a model airplane and put the flaps full and kind of go fast, you'll notice that it's staying level, but the nose is down about 10 degrees. So if you want to look scale on this airplane, you need to have full flaps, because if not, because the first time I landed this, folks, I didn't want to land with any flaps, so I landed with no flaps, and it landed like the Concorde. And it was kind of weird because I thought I was going to touch the tail on the ground because it needed such a high angle of attack to generate enough lift at the airspeed I was touching down at. So then I did 1 notch of flaps, a lot better. And I actually was scared to use full flaps after all my experience, because full flaps on this is 60 degrees, which is a boatload of drag. The whole first week I flew this plane, I never used full flaps. I finally got to the field by myself. Well, no, there's like 3 or 4 people there, not a big crowd. And I wanted to go up and do my slow flight, full flaps, really get used to this airplane. And folks, another thing is, and I did a video, and I need to do a new video. This video is probably 5 years old. Because folks, I have 500 videos now about model aviation. And a little bit about my ultralights. But here's the thing. When your flaps go down on a lot of airplanes, it causes the nose to pitch up. Just because of the lift that's being generated. So you go into your mixes, and this is what I did the video on, was how to mix elevator to flaps. So as your flaps go down, your elevator goes down just a little bit. When they go to full, it goes down a little bit more. And you'll have to play around to find that sweet spot. Cool thing about this airplane is, Hangar 9 nailed it. When they say in the book how much down elevator to give with how much flaps you have, they're spot on right. I didn't have to do anything. And have I told you how kick-ass of an airplane this is? So use flaps with respect. Okay, that's number 7. But another thing about flaps is, folks, I love the flaps because they're basically air brakes. They can help me slow the plane down. I'll bring the power up. If I'm a little bit fast, I can bring the power down, and it greatly will come down speed. But be very careful with flaps. You can get into a sink rate. And folks, we had a fun fly at the field last weekend. And I don't know if anybody knew what was going on in my head. But on my second flight, as I came around, I wanted to really get a good sink rate started. And I wanted to round it out a little bit with power and elevator. And folks, that last 10 feet, it started to sink so fast, it freaked me out because I had never seen my Bronco basically like an elevator falling out of the sky. And I went to half throttle about 2 feet, 3 feet before touching the ground. And that's all it needed. It rounded out, touched on the main gear. I held the nose off the ground, and it looked like I was a sweet pilot. I was like, nice, that was awesome. Total luck. And folks, I should never have let the plane get ahead of me like that. I was behind the airplane when that sink rate started. And folks, we sometimes want to freeze. We're like, what the heck? Yeah, I don't know what it is. But you've got to do something. It's better than doing nothing, okay? Another thing about landing. Mind the wind. Understand the wind conditions. Okay, folks, I remember one time I was at a big fly-in. I'm in my tent, and I had a little flag, and I'm like, wow, okay, the wind's a direct crosswind. I went all the way down there, and then I looked at the real flag up in the air, and it was right down the runway. I was like, oh, there's no crosswind. So the thing is, and I've had the opposite happen, where I go down there, and I'm like, oh, the wind's right down the runway. I get down there, and I go down the runway, and right as I've taken off, the plane starts to yaw and crab, and I'm like, holy crap, there's a big crosswind here. Understand the wind and understand your skills with flying in the wind. I would challenge you to always fly in some wind. I have what I call my beater plane, which is my Cessna 170 from Flex. I could fly that virtually in hurricane winds. Okay, I think it would be hilarious just to see it at full throttle right in front of me, okay, with the wind going by at like 70 mile an hour. But that's not very smart, okay, so don't do it. But the thing is, folks, you've got to learn how to fly in the wind, especially if you live in windy states. Hawaii, I think there's always wind in Hawaii. In Indiana, we're really lucky. We'll have some days where there is not a fart of wind in the air. And then other days, it's 15 to 35. Learn to fly in the wind, but learn to land in the wind. Number 9, understand the round out to the flare. Okay, get to know the airframe. Okay, come down 10 feet in the air, round out, add power and go around. Understand if there's going to be any pitch issues. Every time I test fly an airplane, I take it up high and I slow fly it all the way point that it stalls, and I try to get it to stall where it rolls on its back. This plane never did. It just mushed over because it is a little bit nose heavy. But it mushed over and I flew right out of it. I could never get this to do what I call an accelerated stall where it completely departed flight. Another reason this is such a sweet airplane. But folks, it's so important to understand that when you go to flare, I saw a guy literally stick the landing gear right through the top of his wings. And I was like, oh man. And I'm like, you need help? And he goes, nope. And I go, what happened? He goes, I just didn't flare in time. And he said that the approach got him all nervous because it was kind of windy. And he just basically was frozen. He just wanted to get on the ground. But he never thought it would push his landing gear through the wing. Okay, so understand, don't slam the plane down, learn how to round out, learn how to flare, it's very important. Here's I put commit and go around as number 10. So folks, here's something that, folks, I don't want to ever be a hypocrite, because I don't want to tell you to do something that I've done many times. For some reason, we get into some weird narrow tunnel vision that we have to land our airplane. Or we feel embarrassed, 1 bounce, 2 bounce, and then we go around, and everybody's like, well, he really is shitty at that landing. It doesn't matter. Your airframe is the most important thing that you're flying out there most of the time. Unless you're just independently rich and you don't care to throw away airframes, you don't want to damage your airplane. But there's a big ego going on. We all kind of have it. I mean, folks, I don't want to say we all have it, because that's me being judgmental. But most of us, when we fly our airplanes, we're doing it for ourselves, but we're also kind of showing to other people our planes and our skill levels, and it's just being part of that whole village or that whole group, just being part of that friend colony or whatever the hell you want to call it, community. And I've seen people have really bad landings and they walk back and go, man, I'm so embarrassed. I'm like, why? Everybody saw me do that. Who gives a shit? Honestly, folks, flying model airplanes is to be fun. It takes skill. It takes time. And first of all, to me, you're a rock star if you're flying model aircraft or doing anything RC, because it shows you've got a passion to tinker. You want to build things. To me, you're already a rock star. I don't care if you're building those really cool destroyers and putting them in lakes and pretending to be having Guadalcanal. Gosh, I got to say that right. But the thing is it doesn't matter. If you're doing anything remote control, you're awesome. Don't ever be embarrassed because of a poor landing. Unless you're out of gas, on fire, or no battery, you can always go around. And folks, I have done so many go-arounds because I'm practicing perfection in landings. Okay, if I'm flying my little Flex 170 or my Otter or things like that, I don't care if they bounce around a little bit in landing. I just kind of laugh about it. But if I'm flying my lead sled, if I'm flying, my OV-10, if I'm flying my L-39, any of those things, I really, really commit to making it look like a good landing. Okay, so folks, that is, for me, the 10 kind of most common sense things about landing a model airplane. If you, and I've said this in many videos, if you really want to practice perfection in landing, get some paper plates, go out to the flying field when nobody's around, throw them out there and see how close you can land to those paper plates every time. Commit to it, but the moment it looks wonky, go around. Or then forget the paper plates there and just land your airplane. Folks, one of the things that you've got to be really careful of doing is when we're buying our $300 to $500 airplanes, to some people that's a huge commitment, so other people that's just discretionary funds. We get really comfortable with those airplanes. You got to be careful about complacency, because folks, by the time I end up with 500 flights on this plane, I'm going to be very complacent with it. But I still got to respect that it's an expensive airplane. It's one I don't want to have to replace, and I want to keep flying it for many, many flights. So learn how to fly, learn how to land. Okay? Rock on, folks. That's it for this video. Please do me a favor, like and subscribe. And if you're on the mobile app, hype this video. There's a way on the mobile app you can hype it. It helps the YouTube algorithms tell all the other model airplane people out there that I have a channel and they should be watching this stuff, okay? So, hey, and again, put in the comments below what you think about these videos. Tell me your greatest landing, your worst landing, what makes you scared about landing. Just tell me everything about landing, okay? Take care, everybody. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.